There's a group of people out there, and I mean much more than half of our country, much more. You're not allowed to use the term silent majority anymore, you know. You're not allowed because they make that into a whole big deal. But there's a group of people out there, massive numbers. But you're not alone. The silent majority is silent no more. Your moment in the sun is just beginning. The story of America has always been written by everyday citizens who love their country so much they could not help but speak out. I stand before you today to declare the silent majority is stronger than ever before.
President Trump has often brought up that phrase made famous by Richard Nixon, the silent majority, tweeting about it recently out of the blue, seemingly without any context. And some of those tweets amid the height of the recent protests against racism. Professor at Princeton University, Eddie Glaude Jr. addresses that term, silent majority, in his new book, Begin Again, James Baldwin's America and Its Urgent Lessons for Our Own. And Eddie, you write in part this: it is not our task to save white people. That old idea has provided comfort for far too many across generations who continued to hate and harm. It works like a ready-made absolution. White people will be forgiven for their sins because that's what black people do. We forgive them, and they sin again. Baldwin was right to give up on this folly. We have to give up this folly, too. Much is made today of the necessity to reach out to the disaffected Trump voter. This is the latest description of the silent majority, the Reagan Democrat, or the forgotten American. For the most part, we are told these are the high school educated white people, working class white people who feel left out of an increasingly diverse America. But to direct our attention to these voters, to give our energy over to convincing them to believe otherwise, often takes us away from the difficult task of building a better world. In some ways, they hold the country hostage, and we compromise to appease them. Baldwin came to understand that there were some white people in America who refused to give up their commitments to the value gap. For him, we could not predicate our politics on changing their minds and souls. They had to do that for themselves. Our task, then, is not to save Trump voters. It isn't to convince them to give up their views that white people ought to matter more than others. Our task is to build a world where such a view has no place or quarter to breathe. Eddie, I couldn't agree more. It's a frustrating cycle. But how do we begin again? Because it's proven to be very difficult.
Right, Mika, thank you again for this amazing conversation that we've been having all week. It seems to me that a choice has to be made. We have to decide once and for all whether we're going to double down on our ugly commitments with regards to race. We've been fighting the Civil War for generations. And the silent majority is just the latest phrase to reference those deep underlying contradictions that have haunted American democracy. So when we think about, redemption, lost cause, silent majority, forgotten Americans, these are all references to this idea that America is a white nation. Baldwin made a distinction, and I want to be very clear. He's talking in a generality. White people is an ideology. It's a moral choice. They don't exist. He knows that there are some people who happen to be white that I and he, we deeply love. But those who are invested in this idea that whiteness accords you advantage, they are committed to an idea that distorts and disfigures democracy. And let me say this really quickly. We only have a finite amount of civic energy. And if we spend that energy trying to convince people who hold noxious views about black folk, who hold insidious views about race, we then don't have the energy to build the world where those views cannot breathe. And I want to spend that finite energy, Mika, really building a world where you and I and Joe and everyone else, my child, my son, that we can be otherwise, that we can be what God promised us to be.
So, Eddie, as we've been talking about this morning, you've got a president who's standing in the way of exactly what you've described there. He's not hiding it anymore. He tweeted a video where the first voice on it shouted white power. He yesterday called the words Black Lives Matter a symbol of hate as it was being discussed to be painted on Fifth Avenue by the mayor of New York City. He says he will hold up a military funding bill unless they abandon the idea of changing the name of a base that's named for the Confederate General Robert E. Lee. So what do you do in these next 4-6 months, or perhaps even 4.5 more years, about that progress you're talking about when you have the leader of the country standing in its way?
Well, we have to speak the truth. You know, we have to expose the lies. We have to make the suffering speak. Look, I think this is what Donald Trump is doing. And Pascal and everyone else. You know, we often talk about the Democratic Party and its challenge of having to get black voters out, get voters of color out, that it's a turnout game. I think what the Trump campaign understands is that when we look at voting America, that a large percentage of white Americans are not voting, that they don't believe that the country is actually supporting them, that he believes that the way to turn those disaffected white voters out is to appeal to their sense of resentment, their sense of victimhood, their grievance. So he's going to appeal to these base feelings, this hatred and this ugliness. And so what we have to do is finally make a choice that we're going to build a just America, that we're going to end the Civil War that has been guiding, that has been in some ways the undertow of our politics for generations. And we have to make that choice stark. There's no middle ground, Willie. You have to either say we're going to finally give up this race stuff, this racism stuff, or we're going to double down on an ugly America, and for another generation, we're going to have to deal with what we have been dealing with.
I want to bring in one of your colleagues, Eddie, professor of African American Studies at Princeton University, Imani Perry. What is your take, Imani, on this conversation so far? And then you can toss a question to the professor.
Sure. It's wonderful to have a moment to talk about this extraordinary book. And one of the things that makes it so special is in this moment is that we are in a season in which we are avoiding long avoided, long denied truths about this nation. And the impetus behind the title is to, take that seriously, right? If one refuses abdication of responsibility, one must begin again. And my feeling about this book is that it really demands a kind of honesty in word and deed. And I wanted to ask Eddie to speak for a moment about this concept of the third founding as a basis for how we begin again in this particular season. Where do we go from here, in a sense, is what I'm seeking from you.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Professor Perry. Imani has been such a wonderful partner in this journey around this book. We talk about the second founding with regards to Reconstruction and what Stevens and radical Reconstruction proponents did. They went back to our founding principles and tried to, in some ways, live up to our stated ideals by expanding citizenship, passing 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments, really trying to reach for an idea of multiracial democracy. In our moment, what we have to do is tell the truth about how we have failed up to this point. And then we have to engage in a kind of reconciliation and repair. And that repair will involve a series of policies to address the underlying inequality that has been a result of generations of policy. And that's going to be hard work, it seems to me. But it seems to me that if we all agree, no matter our political position along the ideological spectrum, that there are some basic ideals that animate the American project, then we will then implement policies, I believe, after we've told the truth, after we've engaged in genuine reconciliation, we can begin to repair the country and then usher in a new America. That's really idealistic, but for the sake of future generations, for the sake of our current way of living, we need to do that hard work.
I love this. We need to have like a weekly Princeton faculty meeting live on our show, because this would be it right here. Eddie, thank you so much. We will continue our week-long conversation around Eddie's new book, Begin Again, tomorrow. Imani Perry, thank you as well.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.